I appreciate Gary's volunteering to do a devotion tonight. He's new to our Bible study, and I really appreciate that. And I noticed that we don't have anyone that is signed up to do next week's devotion. And the memory verse for next week is in Genesis 25:27. The boys grew up, and Esau became a faithful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was a quiet man, staying among the tents. And so often, when we think about devotions, we think that it has to be something deep or something very theological or a lot of background to it. But the obvious part of a devotion is just what that would mean to you. And when I look at that verse, what it would mean to me would just be the fact that we're all different. God gives us different talents, different occupations, things that we do, and yet God uses us wherever we are, even though we are all different. And that, in a nutshell, is a devotion. So it need not be complicated. It's just being reminded of what is obvious in a verse. And so for those of you that haven't already committed to sharing your thoughts on devotion, I'd encourage you again to look at those that are in our memory verses for this week and see if there isn't one that would have a simple message that perhaps you can share your thoughts with us about. Well, for our lecture tonight, our subject is the wickedness destroyed and obedience rewarded. Chuck and I took a little mini vacation a couple of weeks ago to Florida to visit family, and it's been quite a while since we were on an airplane. And if I can get it, I always like the window seat, like to look down on it. And we flew from Ontario to Dallas to Orlando. And you can kind of look down and get the big picture below you, can't you? You kind of see a patchwork of the ground that's laid out below you as you fly. And I found myself thinking how God must view the earth as a big picture, and yet with the calmness of his eternal plan in mind. And yet, even though he has this very wide perspective, he's so very near to us that he knows the number of the hairs on our head. And he also knows the thoughts and the motives of our heart. Knowing that I was going to be doing this week's lecture, I found myself meditating on how to approach this scripture. And I thought perhaps it would be good to maybe take a step back, get a big perspective, a mile-high view, so to speak, and see what we can apply to our lives from the scripture this week. And so there are three areas of perspective. I want to look at the perspective of influence, the perspective of internal motivation, and the perspective of integrity. The lesson this week finds Lot sitting at the city gates of Sodom. And this was a prominent place where the legal and civil and business transactions of the city were conducted. So potentially he was in a place to be an influence for righteousness. And we do need to remember that as weak and as passive as he seemed to be, he remained a believer. 2 Peter 2:7 and 8, it says, Lot was a righteous man. He was distressed by the filthy lives of the lawless. For that righteous man, living among them day after day, was tormented in his righteous soul by the lawless deeds he saw and heard. So he may not have been entrenched in Sodom's city affairs, but certainly he was not completely naive about the city's moral condition. So when the visitors to the city arrived, Lot was quick to urge them to spend the night in safety in his home. And you may remember the story that we studied in Judges 19 about the Levite and his concubine. They went to the city of Gibeah to spend the night, and Judges 19:15 says, they went in and sat at the city square, but no one took them into his home for the night. And of course that was the custom of the day. You sat in the square until some kind soul invited you in and offered you hospitality. Well, for the old man and his concubine, Levite came in and offered his home. But like Lot's visitors, the men of the city came demanding sex, but were given the Levite's concubine, whom they proceeded to rape to death. And of course, that's another story and another study. But the point is, offering hospitality was a sacred trust in that day and time. And there was no way that Lot was going to violate that. So Lot stepped outside to offer a compromise, his virgin daughters. And so we ask ourselves, was that a legitimate offer or just a ploy? Martin Luther comments that he believes that Lot was just being shrewd and expected the citizens of Sodom to reject the offer. They didn't want women, they wanted men. So regardless of the angelic visitors who came, they came to the rescue by blinding the men at the door. You know, when God sent the flood in Noah's day, it was a universal judgment. Now, this was a judgment of destruction on cities. And we need to remember that judgment is God's finalizing of man's decisions. Sodom and Gomorrah's fate for wickedness is destruction. If you're at all familiar with the narrow land of Israel, you find at the north the Sea of Galilee, feeding into the Jordan River and ending up in the Dead Sea, the Salt Sea. And the Dead Sea, we know, is below sea level and has no outlet. It's just stagnant, polluted, reeking water. And the Dead Sea today covers the remains of Sodom and Gomorrah. So what was Lot's influence on Sodom? It would appear that it was very little. Maybe a little bit of influence did stay God's wrath and grace much longer than Sodom deserved. But conversely, when we consider Sodom's influence on Lot, then we get a new perspective. First of all, the family was told that they must leave and they must be quick about it. But the others just thought it was a joke. So here are angels on a mission from God, not only to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, but to save Lot and his family. And then Lot drags his feet. He doesn't seem to appreciate what's being done for him, does he? And isn't sin comfortable for a lot of us? Isn't compromise and rationalization easy? How well Satan knows how much we'll tolerate, and that we'll tolerate a lot of things wrong rather than take the active steps to change either the circumstances or to change ourselves. Well, the angels have to lead him out by the hand. So that is really resistance to change. There were 5 cities on the plain of Jordan destined to be for destruction, according to the scholars. But Lot was told to flee to the mountains, but instead he begged to go to the little city of Zoar. Apparently he just really liked city life. So his request was granted, and Zoar was spared, and Lot, his wife, and daughters escaped just in time. Burning sulfur and asphalt rained down on all the inhabitants. But Lot's wife looked back. And we asked, did she miss her friends? Did she miss her home, her possessions? Whatever it was, her disobedience caused her to be turned into a pillar of salt. So what a lesson for us. We need to flee immorality and not look back. The influence of wickedness is so subtle and so destructive, and it's God's desire that we be saved out from it. Well, now over here we have Abraham, and he sees the smoke and probably asks himself, was Lot saved? The smoke was certainly carrying a clear message. The message was, I am the Lord, vengeance is mine, be holy for I am holy. And certainly it has a message for us today. First of all, God is still a God of holiness. He's grieved by sin. He gets angry when it's flaunted in his face. And one commentator remarked that if God doesn't